everyone, and welcome to the first part of the Pixel Quest lab. In this part, we're going to explore the basics of Unity and 2D objects. Let's begin by looking at all the different windows that are presented to us by Unity. Let's start with the one in the center. That is called the scene view. It displays everything that's inside your game and allows you to edit it at any moment. Right now, the scene view is set to 2D. That's because we're going to be working in 2D. And even though we're making a 2D game, everything is processed as a 3D object. If we click on this, you will see that we are in 3D space. But don't worry about it, we're going to stick to the 2D space for now. After the scene view, let's take a look at the hierarchy view. This is a representation of all the objects inside your scene. So right here we have the name of our scene. We are working in a test level. And we have two objects in it. Main camera, which is defined by this white rectangle, and a direct light source, which we will use in the future. Looking at the main camera object, you can see a little preview of our game view. Right now, there's nothing in it. It's just a blue screen as defined by this box here. This view is the inspector. It defines all the properties that the object holds. At the top of it, you have the object's name, if it's on or off, different types of tags, and a transform. Every game object comes with these together. The camera and the audio listener are additional components that give it special properties. As we see, the camera gives us a preview of the actual game view. If you want to see it up close, you can click on here and you will see what the game is currently looking like. Lastly, let's focus our attention to the bottom of the screen here. This is our project view. It holds all of our assets. So anything that we will create or instantiate will come from here into the hierarchy and will be displayed in the scene view. It will become clearer as we go through. If you hold and drag, you will notice that you are able to move any scene view in any direction possible. If you ever find yourself in a position where your views look very disorganized, you can go here and there's different types of setups that you can use. If you click the default, it will make the game look like it normally did. One last thing I would like to mention about views is that if you double click on them, they will become full screen. I've seen many people get confused by this. If you ever get lost, you can also just double click back and it'll bring you back to your normal layout. Now that we have settled that, let's create a very simple object. You can either click on this plus button over here, which will define all the different object types you can create, or you can click on the body of the hierarchy view and create an object from there. We're going to create a 2D object. That's a sprite, and we're going to create a square. Now you can see that there's a square in our scene and a square in our hierarchy, and currently we have it highlighted. When we look at the inspector, we see that its name is a square. Its transform has a position of 0, 0, 0, rotation of 0, 0, 0, and scale of 1, 1, 1. This will be default for everything. It has additional component of a sprite renderer, which actually is what draws the square shape that we see. Now I'm going to zoom in on my square using my mouse wheel. As you can see, I'm not perfectly aligned. What I can do is either right click and drag my mouse around, or I can go to this transform toolbar, click the hand icon, and left click to drag around. These tools will allow us to manipulate the object in the scene view. Let's start by actually moving the square. We can click the move tool and we will have these arrows. Green will always represent the Y direction and red will always represent the X direction. If I move it here, you'll notice that the value of the X position has changed positively. That's because I went in the positive X direction. I can do the same thing with Y, moving it up and down. Or if you notice there's a little square here, this will allow me to move it on the XY plane. So if I move it, I'll be able to move both directions at once. Now let's look at the rotation tool. As you will see, it's represented by circles. If I move it around the red line, you will see that it's going in the X direction. You will notice that at some point it even disappears. That's because, like we've mentioned, this is a 3D object in 3D space. We've lost it at the moment, but if you double click on it, you will see that it's flat on the Z axis. That's why we can't see it. But if we go back and reset the value, we'll be able to see it in two directions again. And if you want to rotate it around the Y axis, you can use the green one. And in this case, the blue line is the Z axis, which we'll be using for the most part of the rotation of our objects. Next, we have the scale tool. The scale tool looks like the move tool, but instead of arrows it has these little squares. By holding on one of these squares, you'll be able to either stretch or shrink the object however you like, and the changes are reflected in the scale parts of your transform. In the center, you have a big square that controls all the directions, and you will see that it even controls the z-axis. Next is the rect tool, which is used specifically for 2D objects. You can move it around by holding the left mouse button on it. You can scale it up and down however you like, and if you hold your mouse near the corner, you can even rotate it. You may have noticed this little circle in the center. That is the pivot point of the object. Right here in the scene view, you can actually set the pivot point to be in different locations. Center will always find the center of the object and place it there. Pivot is whatever has been specified by the creator of the object. In this case, the center and pivot point are the same. However, the pivot point can be different at different objects. For example, let's say you're working with an arm. You will have a pivot point either at the shoulder or an elbow point to rotate around that spot. While we're there, let's look at this global option. Global refers to the way the object interacts with the world. Best way to view it is with the use of the move tool. At this moment, X always points in the X positive direction and Y always points in the positive Y direction. This will be true no matter what the rotation of the object is. As we can see, the movement tool, it always faces the global X and Y positive directions. However, when you switch to local, you'll notice that the arrows shift to face the positive directions that the object is currently rotated in. Normally, it's best practice to work in global coordinates, that way everything is always facing in the direction you want it to point. While we're discussing these, we can talk about these grid options that we have next to it. The first one displays a grid. It allows us to keep track of where the object is. And the second one is grid snapping. It only works in global coordinates and allows you to move in incremented points. In this case, 0.5 units across each position. Lastly, you have the incremental snapping. This is when you hold Control and it will snap between these values for movement, rotation, and scale. So for instance, as you can see, I'm moving by 0.25. When I'm rotating, it's by 15. And when I scale, it's in sizes of 1. Let's reset our object to its default values. To do that, we can click these three dots and click reset. The object has moved back to 0, 0, 0 with 0, 0, 0 rotation and 1, 1, 1. As you see, we've lost it. We can double tap on the object name or we can click F and we'll be brought to it. Before we finish off this part of the lesson, let's talk about the sprite renderer object. You have different controls over the visual representation of the image. Right now, if we click on the square, we will be brought to the project view where the image is located. As you can see, Unity provides us with several default images. We are using the square, but we can just drag and drop whichever one we'd like, and it will get replaced by it. You can also click the circle, and it will bring up a viewfinder for you here. Next, we can control the color. All objects start with a white color, but you can control it to be anything you want. The controls are done by RGBA. RGB control the color values, so for instance right now it's fully red, and A controls the alpha, which is how transparent the object is. The only other option we really need to be focused on right now is the sorting layer. Layers are the way that Unity tells us what's closer to the camera. Since this is a 2D game, there is no z-axis and something can't be far away or up close to the camera, we can define it by using this. To test this, let's create a second object. Let's create a sprite. That's going to be a triangle. Right now you can see that the triangle is behind the circle. Let's get rid of this sun. The sun is the representation of the direction of light and it's shown off by the gizmo. Now you can see that the triangle is behind the circle. If we click back on our square, you will see that the circle has a layer order of 1 and the triangle has a layer order of 0. 0 is lower, therefore further back from the camera than the 1. But if we want to make the triangle come forward, we can change this to be 2. And now the triangle will always be in front of the circle. This should conclude the basics of Unity and 2D objects and allow us to step into collisions, rigid bodies, and effectors in the next part of the video.